Hello, everybody. It's Friday. That means it's time for another topic of the week. Last week's topic, well, there wasn't one because I just wasn't feeling well on Friday, and so there it was. Um, but this week, hey, news. The Khorne FAQ dropped today. And I don't want this to be specifically about that, although I am always sad to have stuff from our show invalidated that quickly, because we talked about the Wrathmonger cannon combo, and that got broken today because the Wrathmongers were clarified to only work on melee attacks, which made me sad. I feel like that was a negative choice. I don't know why that needed to be fixed. Felt like one of those things that didn't need to happen. People were enjoying it. It gave an interesting dimension, and wasn't any real problem. And I don't think Khorne is any more melee focused than anybody else. The cannon's been part of their army for a long time. It should have an actual point and be good. It doesn't need to be bad. There's plenty of melee armies in the game. Like, having some things that have some minor other options seems good. Lots of armies just want to punch you in the face. So, hey, whatever. But that got me thinking about the nature of the FAQs in general and this cycle and getting things fixed and what we expect to see. And oftentimes the line here between, I think a lot of people hope for adjustments to stuff in these. And obviously there's different sort of periods. Ostensibly the FAQ is to correct things that are wrong, right? Or to answer questions, obviously, as it's a frequently asked question. And then we have the big FAQ twice a year, and that's sort of, this general system update where we clarify a bunch of different stuff. And then we have the GHB, which comes out once a year, which, sort of rebalances things points-wise. And that's all fine. Like, theoretically, that all makes sense. There's a struggle here. There's a sort of Scylla and Charybdis we're trying to sail between, right? And on one hand, one of our sea monsters here is the threat that they're sort of damaging imbalance in the game, whatever that means. And I don't want this to devolve into thoughts of that. Just let's all assume there's a thing called that, and it means something. And whatever you think it means, you're right. Congratulations. So that's one thing. So and obviously to correct that, you would make fixes, right? You would fix rules, change things, repoint things, whatever you need to do. And then on the other hand is constant change, right? So this isn't a fast hobby. If you want a new Magic deck, I could go online and get a Magic deck in the next 5 minutes, whatever deck I wanted. It's just a question of, am I willing to spend the money? And that's it. In 2 days shipping, I will have that Magic deck in my hand, and I can get that from any number of sites. Now, ostensibly, maybe I could go find painted miniatures or something like that. But that's not really the hobby we're in, right? The hobby we're in is, and good luck finding a whole cohesive army, by the way. I mean, sometimes you can buy a whole painted army, but again, that's not really what most of us are here for. This hobby has a long sort of build up to it, right? And so you get an idea of the army you want to play, or why you like the army, or something like that, and you start painting things, and then if things change too rapidly, that can be disruptive. I would also point out that you're watching this, so that means you're probably somewhat dialed into the scene of AOS or whatever. But there's lots of people who play this game who don't religiously keep up on FAQs, who have no idea an FAQ dropped today, and are going to keep playing with whatever rules are written in their book. So there's always the threat that you can sort of like, not only can you change things too rapidly, which can be damaging, you can also just be sort of yelling into the wind, as it were, right? And so I think trying to sail between those is not easy. The cadence that they've generally established feels fine. The problem to me comes up when you have these sorts of gray areas, the canon thing. Nothing about that read as an error, right? The Wrathmongers rule. It's just read as like, that's how this works. Cool. This is lots of things have unique. I'll give you an example of something that broke the other way. Karnak doesn't have the leader keyword in leader designation, I should say, role, whatever, in the back of the book. which is cool because that means technically you can have 7 heroes in a Khorne army if one of them is Khorne, because he's not taking up a leader slot. Cool. That's a neat thing. And, Khorne's a generally really good hero. As we talked about on the show, I think he's Hoss, man. That 3-headed dog, he rules. And, but you could read that and say, oh, that was an error. It should have said leader. Every other hero in the game, without exception, is a leader. Right? But this one isn't. Well, that feels more like an error than the Wrathmongers thing read as. Right? I didn't read Wrathmongers and think, oh, this is an error. It meant to say melee attacks. Seemed pretty sensible. Wrathmongers classically just added a bunch of attacks to everything around them. They drive people into a frenzy. Sure, it affects shooting as much as anything else. Why not? Okay. Sure, the cannon, which is a demonic engine in and of itself, starts getting really angry and shooting off more angry demon balls, whatever the heck it shoots out of it. Hashtag angry demon balls. Or the Bloodthirster whips more, right? Like it tracks. Like narratively, it makes sense in your head. And yet, the FAQ came out. Both those questions about Khorne and the Wrathmongers got answered. That is to say, or got changed. I don't know the questions. But both of those things were spoken to. How about that? And one of them was changed. Now, ostensibly, it doesn't feel like there was an inconsistency and it got fixed. It doesn't feel like something was wrong and it got corrected. There's the good example is you go back to the Gloomspite Gitz book, and there was a thing that said this thing happens at the end of your turn. And then there was an artifact that said, hey, when this thing happens, you can do it twice in your hero phase instead of once. But hold on, the core rule says it happens at the end of your turn. Everybody read that and said, aha, okay, there's an error here. One of these is incorrect. One of these is happening at the wrong time. And the general feeling was the artifact was wrong. And because when you sort of thought through what was going on, it would make more sense to happen at the end of turn. Sure enough, that's exactly the case, right? When the FAQ came out, that's what happened. It was corrected. That felt like an error from minute one. It begged the FAQ, right? And yet here it didn't. And so my point is that some of this stuff can sometimes be gray as to what deserves to fit in what category. And, there's also at the same time a sort of challenge here with the timing of the FAQ. So the FAQs happen roughly 2-ish weeks out from the release of the book. And for obvious reasons. So there's internal designers, developers, there's playtesters. A lot of people read the book. You can have 30 people read a book and play it and still miss a thing. It's not hard. Okay? As somebody who's written several game books, I can assure you I had a large group of playtesters and lots of people read things. And yet still, we were religious about editing and testing. And my stuff doesn't matter at all. But I was willing to take the time, and I still had errors. And we really put the old college try into it here with a pretty large group of people. Now they certainly out-resourced me by a wide margin. You would expect something published by a singular person to have those kinds of errors, and you would hope that a book put out on the scale of a company of that size would have less. And I think for the most part that's true. But once you put something out to a test where it's going to have X thousands of people stress testing it, right? When you increase the number of people reading something by several orders of magnitude, you're just going to find things you couldn't find before. So the challenge here is the FAQ wants to come out fast because people are trying to make decisions about what to do with their army, right? And in general, the sort of thing is you should wait till the FAQ before you make sort of decisions because things can change. Sort of common wisdom. But again, I don't know how common wisdom that is. Does everybody who buys that book think that? I don't know. Right? So one of the thing, and they want to get it out fast so people can make that decision. But when you, there's an old saying, you can have things cheap, you can have things fast, you can have things good, but you can only have 2 out of 3, right? Well, this is definitely cheap. It's free. And that is to say the FAQ doesn't cost you anything to get your hands on. And they want it fast, and that leaves one of these out, right? Now, that's a bit unfair, of course. But I'm only trying to point out here that, like, if we put pressure to increase the speed, then we, by necessity, say that there's less time to work on it. And, you know, like, let's really think about the cycle of what happens here. Like, let's really break this down. Okay? So they give themselves about 2 weeks to do an FAQ. I want to go through this thought exercise as someone who develops products for a living. That's actually my normal job. So a product is released into the world. This book comes out on a Saturday. Okay. And let's say, I don't know what percentage of the population interested in it buys it that first weekend. Probably a good number. Right? I'm always curious about this. What percentage of the sales are within the first 24 hours, first 72 hours, first 2 weeks, first month? I think that'd be a really interesting statistic to look at. Like, versus the first year of sales, right? My suspicion is it's a chart that looks like that. But that's just theory. So you have some percentage of people who aren't buying it the first day, right? Who aren't buying it the first weekend. Whatever. They're all emailing questions. So we have a bunch of people emailing questions in here to this thing, to this email address. So that happens over Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It happens all the time this first week. Okay. So now Monday starts and we're on the clock. The clock has started. There's 10 business days, theoretically, and we want to get this thing published, right? Like, these people are human beings. They work during work hours. They're not like Warhammer robots that just literally work all day. So they have 10 business days, ostensibly, to get this thing published. This one took a little longer. This one took about 12, something like that. Maybe slightly longer than that. Doesn't matter. Let's say you got 10 to 15 business days. How about that? Because I don't want to get lost in the semantics or details of it. So, like, the first week is mostly just questions coming in. Now, assumingly you're grabbing them as they're happening. You're not just, like, letting them sit there. And you're reading the questions. Okay, well, it's a frequently asked question. So you got to, like, look and see. You got to make some kind of triage over all these questions that come in and say, is this a true defect? Is something wrong with the book? Is it a question that's just unclear? Not necessarily a defect, just something that's unclear. Could have been worded better, or it was worded perfectly fine, but it's easy to read it another way, right? Which, that's the English language is an imprecise thing. Even something that's completely clear can mean very different things. Eats, shoots, and leaves. Okay. So is it that? Is it in that category? Or is it neither of those? It's just this person misinterpreting things. And it should be noted that the person, like, every one of those requires research, right? Like, you can't just, you don't, they shouldn't be making this call willy-nilly in the same way that, like, defects on the products I develop. If that happens, I don't just say, oh, well, this is that. We have to go look. You have to go investigate, right? So assuming that takes some time. Now, how much time it takes probably varies. Obviously, I'm just talking about, like, you might say, well, like, oh, you're kind of overcutting it, Vince. It's just cracking a book and taking a look at the relevant section. Well, maybe it is. Yes, if you want to do a bad job at it, that's what it would be. But what you should really be doing is opening the book, looking at that section, also then looking for anything relevant that would touch that. Are there any interacting rules here? Are there any, does anything else reference this that I should also take into account? And by the way, assuming like I already have a pretty good working mastery of the book. But, that's like, there's a difference between, working mastery doesn't mean knows every word in the book verbatim, right? In the rules section of the book verbatim. So the time is burning, right? These questions are coming in and I'm triaging them into these 3 buckets. And so we've got to develop an answer, and we've got to know if it's a defect, how are we going to fix it? If it's something that's unclear, how are we going to reword it, right? What's going to be the precise answer? Because we can't be flippant about these answers, right? Because if we're unclear on this, then that's worse. Now we've only muddied the situation. So, okay. So now we have to be very careful about that wording. And we can argue about how much they've succeeded that and failed that. I'm trying to describe the ideal situation here, right? I don't want to get lost in like, well, somebody saying, well, that's certainly not how they're acting. I would disagree with that, but you can, whatever your opinion is fine. The point is we can all agree that ideally that should be how it's done. The answer should be seeking after clarity, which takes time. Because every one of those answers should theoretically then run through somewhat of a similar mini version of that cycle. That is to say, if I'm answering something that's going to coherently in any way potentially have cascading impacts, I've got to regress that answer, right? I've got to go take that to other people, put it through a little mini Q&A session, and say, did I miss anything here? All this takes time, right? And I've got to do this for every one. Now, theoretically, I'm going to batch some, I'm going to send them along. I've got to think about my later answers. Does this impact anything I answered before? So once I'm to the end, I've got to regress the whole set of answers, right? And say, did I contradict myself anywhere in here? Because it's entirely possible that I would answer two questions and they would have an overlap I wasn't thinking of, right? This is just the reality of development of a product. And game languages and like software code doesn't end up being that much different. Both are aiming at clarity and running without error. So a lot of the same sort of development techniques should be, employed. Okay, so now time is burning. Now I got to take all these and I've got to, get them all, like they've all got to be written down. They've all passed through this QA cycle. It's all got to be approved by someone. Like somewhere someone's making a call that, yes, this is the total universe of things we're going to address, right? And approval takes, so that's time. Because these people all have other jobs they're doing. Like no one is the FAQ person, right? It's not like somebody just sitting around who's like, this is my thing. I don't do anything. I work for this company, but I literally have no role until the 2-week period after a book, right? So everybody in this process has some other job. And they have other things. I don't know what their email box looks like. Think about what your email box looks like on a given day, right? 100 other things going on. Some might be critical. Maybe some other projects blowing up. Who knows? Okay. Then they gotta compile that into a document. You gotta get it, like, it's gotta go into a PDF. Pretty simple PDF, but you gotta send it through your marketing department to make sure all the branding looks correct, all the logo use is correct. You're using a set template, somebody's gotta approve it, or you're using a template from the marketing department, whatever. Like, there can be various steps to all this, but this is all, some version of what's happening. By the way, I'm just imagining all this. I have no insight into how this is done whatsoever. This is just a theoretical exercise. This is a very long topic of the week. I just had a lot to say about this. And then I've got to send it over to the web people so they can queue it up. They got to load it up and make sure that everything looks okay, that it's going to publish all right, set up the time for it to publish and go. Right? Okay. So all that had to happen. And all that had to happen pretty fast. That means your actual time to really sit down and think about these answers probably amounts to a couple days in the middle. Something like that. If you're really stuck to the 2 weeks, if you were really legitimately on a 2-week cycle, which they often go a little bit beyond for reasons that make perfect sense to me given what I just said, right? If you were really sticking to 2 weeks, I've got to imagine you've got 4 days, 5 days to really answer questions. Some of them will have a lot less. Questions that come in very late, you might have a day or two to think your way around them, right? And all that puts pressure on the sort of consistency, let's say, of the answers. So understanding all of that, I think that there needs to be a new policy adopted here. This is where I'm ultimately going around with this. We walk through this whole thing to get to this. And it's sort of provoked by the Khorne canon thing, but it's not really that. I don't care in the end. Whatever. Khorne's fine. I have my Khorne army. I like my Khorne army. I'm happy with the new book. Should have said that right out of the gate. The FAQ doesn't change that much, and I still really like the book. In fact, I think the Khorne book is one of the best books they've written. I should have laid that down earlier, but I stand behind that. I think the book overall is fantastic. It makes me want to play with most of the army. I like a lot of the units. Things are designed well. The slaughter hosts are good. Battalions are compelling. Priced about correctly. Units have the right prices. Lots of things have interesting roles. I said this all on the show. But just so we're clear here, none of this is an indictment of this book. In fact, as I said, I really do think it's a high watermark this far. If just every book looked like this-ish going forward, if they hit this line, I'd be like, we're golden. Just do that forever, man. Okay? So, now, all that said, that's that slide aside. The realities of this FAQ, there should be this sort of do no harm posture that I think is taken. And I think this is probably the guiding rule that hasn't been perhaps in place, or as finally in place as could be. Because, as I said, one, a lot of people are just going to ignore this and never know what happens. It's just the reality. A lot of people aren't tuned into this crap and don't care. Okay, so that's one. And if that happens and they go to a store, that's just asking them to have a bad time because they think they're benefiting from a rule. Their opponent happens to know it's different and says, oh, didn't you read the FAQ? Ugh. Ugh. Okay. So that's true. Number two, people bought the book and had expectations and started getting excited. It is much worse to take something away from someone than to just never give it to them in the first place. Period. We value things we have for even split seconds much higher than imaginary things we never got. Okay? And like, that is, I mean, there's just a bajillion psychological tests on this, but you even think about it for a minute, it's so obvious. If somebody handed you the lottery winnings and then took it back 5 minutes later, that is catastrophically worse than you having a lottery ticket and not winning. And my point is you never had it to begin with, there, right? But you don't know that up until the numbers are announced. You could theoretically have the winning ticket before the numbers are announced. Not winning, that being taken away from you when you never had it, is sad. You're always like, oh, shucks, I didn't win the lottery, right? Or whatever. That is not even close to the experience of literally somebody showing up at your house with a giant check and then going, nope, and taking it right out. So, obviously. Right? So once you have a thing, it sucks a lot more to get it taken away. Just period. And three, then we're just changing the system less. We can readjust. If something ends up being more powerful because you left this thing in, let's take the Wrathmongers, for example, okay? That's how it works. Okay, cool. If you feel that's too strong, just go to the GHP 19 and knock them up 20 points or something. Job's a good one. Right? My point is you have other tools to do this. So with the FAQ, I think we need to take on this sort of do no harm policy and use the mechanisms and the timings we have. Now, you might say oh, well, there's these other things. I really don't like them. They should have been power adjusted in previous books that have come out recently. Not what I'm talking about, right? Because those things didn't get adjusted or changed. And I would say don't. Use other mechanisms to fix those. And or prevent them, hopefully, from happening in the first place. That would be an even better world. But the do no harm mentality, I think, would be what I'd like to see. But that was a super long topic of the week. These are normally 5 minutes. But here we are. I guess I had a lot to say. So, that's this week's topic, the FAQs. What do you think of my sort of guiding principle that I've portrayed there? Am I full of it? Am I being nonsensical? Do you agree with me? What do you think of the new FAQ? As always, comment below. Let me know what you think. Or make a response video, and I'll link it down below. But as always, I thank you for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.